Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Mem Gimel. We're going to get started from a review of the previous daf. We had a Mishnah. Let's say kelim. If you find vessels and you have etched into them the sun, the moon, or the a dragon, okay, some sort of image of a dragon, then they have to be destroyed. Okay, and then we said it's only these three things. If you have other things etched into vessels, okay, it's not exactly clear. Are they just drawn on vessels? It seems like they're drawn on. We discussed yesterday the difference between something drawn on a vessel versus something like an actual statue, or perhaps even I went to look this up. We distinguish between motzei kelim, when you find vessels with drawings on them, versus oseh. And that's what we said all the images are forbidden, and that's all different kinds of images, like the sun, the stars, and the constellations are forbidden if you create them in images. Now, what does it mean to create an image? Could mean an actual statue. It could also mean specifically a drawing that's either where the drawing comes out of the paper or is carved into, or whatever it might be, into the material, where it's something sticking out, okay, jutting out in one direction. Um, Whether just drawing a picture of these items is forbidden, that's also comes up as a question. So I'm just kind of raising this in terms of halachically, there's a range of opinions about what exactly the oseh means. Okay, so we distinguished, then what we did was we brought this bright of Rav Sheshet, who had three lines. We'll just go back to the three lines and then we're going to explain that. Kol mazalot mutarim, other than the mazal of chaman levana, which we explained must be motzei if you find kelim, because if you're actually creating an image or an etching or a drawing or something like that, then it would be forbidden anything, okay, when it's not on a vessel, but in and of itself. And then kol partsufim mutarim chutz mi partsuf adam. There we said partsuf adam wasn't on our list in the Mishnah, so it must be that's actually creating, partsuf. And then the face of someone is not forbidden. So right now we have what's forbidden to make. It's forbidden to on a vessel. It's just the three things we saw in the Mishnah: the sun, the moon, and the dragon. On to create an image, it's forbidden if it's in the form of stars, constellations, and a bunch of other images we saw. And then we had, if it's a face of someone, it's just a human face. That's a problem, okay, to draw. And then we got back though and said, but the third line, that right, that must be talking about specifically when it comes to the the motzei, because what did we learn here? That okay, and then we said um, the tzura v'drakon is actually not forbidden to draw. It's only a problem, right? That's what we said. Ibo said tzurat drakon mi'asir, last line of Membet. Haktiv lo tasuni te'elohe chesed v'elohe zahav, hani in tzurat drakon lo. There's actually no problem to make the form of a dragon if you're drawing an image, okay? Or again, etching, carving out an image, or sculpting an image. That's not, a tzurat drakon is not a problem. It's only a problem on a vessel specifically. So elapshita b'motzei, right? It must be that's if you find kelim, and then ukiditana motzei kelim b'alohen tzorachama, right? And then reisha, as we saw in our Mishnah, reisha b'sefer b'motzei u'mitiyata b'oseh, and then we're left with this problem that we ended with yesterday, which is the first and last line of this bright Torah Shesha brought are talking about the a vessel, finding vessels with the image on them. And the middle one about the Partsuf Adam, which is forbidden to do, seems to be about forming an image. So how do we explain that? It doesn't make sense that it has this zigzag. Well, Rabbi in Reisha B'Sefer B'Motzei Mitziata B'Oser. Rabbi says, what's the big deal? Just zigzag it, okay? Starts at Motzei, moves to Oseh, goes back to Motzei, okay? Rava gives a different answer. Rava Amar Kula b'motzei. Actually, all three of them are b'motzei. Now, what about the Partsuf Adam, which we said, right? Drakon is not listed on our list of things that if you find a vessel with that image on it, it's a problem. Well, Mitziata Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to say, oh, that middle line actually belongs to a different opinion, not the author of our Mishnah, but Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanya, as it says in the Braita. Rabbi Yehuda Mosif Af Dmut Minika V'Sar Apis. So Rabbi Yehuda adds also the image of a nursing woman and the Sarah piece, okay, which is an idol. By the way, Serapis, if you look it up on the internet, you can find Serapis is a Greek, is an Egyptian god, okay, and we're going to see in a minute that the Gemara also viewed it connected with the Egyptians, because we'll see in a minute they're going to connect it with Yosef when he was in Egypt, which makes sense that it's an Egyptian god. Anyway, the point being that a minikah, which is forbidden, okay, on if it's drawn on a vessel, that has the image of a person, and that's we're going to connect to the Partsuf Adam connects with that, and that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So let's explain the minikah and the Sarah piece while we're here. Minikah al shem Chava, sheminikah kol ha'olam kulo. So the minikah is a symbol of Chava, as if she's a god, because she nursed the entire world, because she was the first mother of the world. Sarah piece al shem Yosef, shesal umefis et ha'olam kulo. Because what did Yosef do? He gave sustenance to everybody in the world in Egypt, right? And therefore it's this Egyptian god that was in the form of Yosef, and it again had an image of a person. Okay, so both of those have images of humans, and there explains the Partsuf Adam, which again is a vessel with the image of them on it. Okay, and then Rabbi Yehuda's version has the three in our Mishnah plus these other two. Now we say this Sarah piece, who did naki griva v'kakayil, he has to be holding a measuring implement and actually measuring, because what did Yosef do? He measured out the food. If it doesn't have that, then it's not forbidden. It's not viewed as a god. He and the nursing mom did not ben b'kaminika. She has to be holding a son and actually nursing. It's not just a woman, but if it's a woman who's nursing with her child, then it's clear that this is the god and people are worshiping this. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to get into a braita that's going to go into this tzurat rakon. Ezu tzurat rakon. What does it look like? Perush Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Kol sheyesh lo tzitzin bein pirkav. If it has scales between its joints. Machve Rav Achi showed, meaning he put his finger there by his neck, bein pirkei tzavar, between the parts of the neck. In other words, the scales have to be between the parts of the neck. Amar Rabbi Chama Rabbi Chanina, halakha Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and Rabbi Chama said that we pass on like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar in terms of his description, has to be between the joints, the scales there. Amar Rabbi Chana Rabbi Yosef ben Levi. Okay, one day I was following Rabbi Elazar Hakapar Beribi Baderech. Okay, we're going to go off now. Until now, we were really discussing this bright of Rav Sheshet and these three images, and how does it compare to other images, and how to understand that braita, and then what did Drakon look like. Now we're going to move into nullification again of idol worshipping items. So now we're going to have this story. Rabbi Shimon ben Levi says, I was walking after Rabbi Lazar Kapar Beribi on this path. Umatzah sham tabat, and I saw him. Okay, he picked up a ring. Well, he didn't pick it up yet. We're going to see. He found a ring, va'aleh tzurat rakon, and that's why we're getting to this. So we're going to talk about bitul of idols, which we talked about before. How do you nullify idols? But it's coming up specifically here because we're talking about the drakon. So there was a ring that had on it the shape of a drakon. Umatzah ovei kochavim katan. So then he saw an ovei kochavim, a minor ovei kochavim. V'lo amar lo klum, and he didn't say anything to this ovei kochavim. But matzah ovei kochavim gadol. But then he found an older ovei kochavim idol worshiper. V'amar lo bitla, and he commanded him nullify this idol and claim this is no longer an idol. Because remember, once a Jew takes it, it's too late. The Jew can't benefit. Now, what Rabbi Lazar Kapar wanted was to use the ring, but he needed, before he picked it up, to have the Gentile nullify it. So he didn't ask a Katan to do it. We're going to see that means he didn't think the nullification of a Katan would be valid, which makes sense, all we know about minors. But he waited for an older one to come, and he said, please nullify it. But the Gentile didn't want to listen to him. Stero ubitla. He slapped him in the face, and then the Gentile was willing to nullify it. Shema minatlat. We can learn three things from the story. That's what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says. They love bringing stories and then say you can learn three things from here. Three is kind of this magic number. Shema mina ovei kochavim mevatel avodah zarah shelo b'shel chaviro. A Gentile can nullify his own avodah zarah and avodah zarah of somebody else. Okay, because here it was interesting. It doesn't actually belong to anybody, but you see that it doesn't. What it really means is you don't have to be the owner to nullify the idol, which we learned already before. Ushmamina yodea b'tiv shel avodah zarah u'mishamshea mevatel, v'she'en yodea b'tiv avodah zarah u'mishamshea eno mevatel. You have to understand what idol worship is. Meaning, this minor was too young and couldn't understand. So the minor doesn't have the power to nullify it because the minor doesn't understand what his power is. But only one who understands what the power of Avodah Zarah is, if you're already of age, then you can nullify it. Ushma mina, third thing, Ovei Kochavim bevatel ba'al korcho. Even if the Ovei Kochavim doesn't want to nullify it and is forced to do it, they can do it anyway, and it's still valid. That's what we see from here because he slapped him in the face and he did it only really against his will. Migade for Rabbi Chanina. But now Rabbi Chanina complains about this story and says, wait a minute. The Lele Rabbi Elazar Kapar Beribi Haditnan did he not hold by the following Mishnah? Hamatzil min ha'ari u'min ha'dov u'min ha'namer u'min ha'gais u'min ha'har u'mizuto shel yam mishlulato shel nar. Okay, if you find an object that was with a lion or a bear or a cheat or a leopard or from an army of people or from the river or from the depths of the sea, or the depths of the river, meaning these are items that definitely the owners were mityaesh. They said, we're never getting this back again. Or where you find it in a big open, what do you call it? A big highway or street or something like that. Any place where it's very, very public, where you assume the owners had what we call yeush, gave up on the object. Well, the owner already gave up hope of ever getting it back. Now, they're assuming right now, and in a minute we'll contradict this, but when Rabbi Chanina starts questioning Rabbi Elazar HaKapar's actions, he says, but wait, if the owner had yeush, don't you think the owner then gave up on it being an idol and basically gave up ownership and therefore gave up its status as an idol? To which Amar Abaye, right? What it really means in terms of yeush is that anyone who finds it can keep it. Now that obviously Rabbi Elazar HaKapar agreed with because Rabbi Elazar HaKapar was going to pick it up. But the point is, don't we think yeush goes hand in hand with bitul, with nullification? To which Abaye answers pretty obviously, those are two separate things. Amar Abaye, he might have been miyayish from the object, but from turning something from an idol to something not called an idol, there was no yeush for that. Okay, that doesn't happen automatically. That you need also to think beyond yeush of, I don't want this to be an idol anymore. Memar Amar, because why do we assume the owner didn't give up on it being an idol? Because the owner said to him or herself, if an idol worshiper finds this, they'll worship it. And if a Jew finds it, because it's expensive, because it's an idol, the Jew will sell it to a Gentile, and the Gentile will worship it. So obviously not knowing that Jews can't benefit from idol worship, but assuming, right, they didn't know that halacha, but the assumption is somebody will worship it, and then even though they had yeush saying, I'll never find this again, they figured someone will find it and will use it. Tnanatam. So that was all about the Tzurat Rakon, right, which we got off on a tangent about right now. Now we're going to go to a Mishnah, and a Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, and we're now going to talk about We're talking about Kiddush HaChodesh. Kiddush HaChodesh is how they determine the new moon, right? That it was a new month. And Rabban Gamliel, what they would do is they would ask the witnesses to say, how did it look? What did it look? Did it look like this? Did it look like that? So Rabban Gamliel, and this is going to take us to almost the end of today's daf, had these Demut Tzurot Levanot, okay? He had these white images of the moon. Ba'aliyato b'tavla b'kotel. Shebehen haya mareh et ha'edyoto v'amar lem, kazeh re'item or kazeh re'item. He had these images of the moon, all different shapes and sizes, and would ask the witnesses, did it look like this? Did it look like that? Did it look like that? And in that way, he would determine if the witnesses were really saw the new moon or not. So, umishare, how could this be permitted? V'haktiv, doesn't it say, lo ta'asuniti? Don't make with me, we saw this before. Lo ta'asun kidmut shamashayim shamshim lefanai. You can't make an image like the images of those things that are serving me above, that serve with me in the heavens, which would include the sun, the moon, the stars, the constellations, everything. So how could he have made a moon, shapes of the moon? For this, we're going to have 4 different answers. It's going to take us a while to get to the real answer. Every time, the first 3 times, it's going to be Abaye. Every time, we're going to reject it ultimately. Amar Abaye. So the first answer of Abaye is, Lo asra Torah ela shamashim she'afshar la'asok kimotan. When it says shamashim shamshim lefanai, it doesn't mean in the heavens, like we thought. It means Shamashima Mashamshim Lefanai in the temple. And what it means is, and it has to be something, you can't make an image of something that you could theoretically make an image of. You know exactly what it looks like. We don't know exactly. Now, maybe nowadays it's a little different, but certainly then, we don't know exactly what the sun looks like, what the moon looks like, what constellations look like. So if they would make an image, it would be something like it, but that's not a problem because it's not really similar. But what you really can't do is, okay, we're going to see things that you could make an exact replica of. For example, Keditanya, as it says in a Braita, Lo yase Adam bayit tavnit hechal. You can't make a house in the image of the hechal, the sanctuary, like the same size, shape, form, right? Achsadra tavnit ulam, a hallway that like the ulam, in the outside the sanctuary. Chatzir tavnit, right? That was the entranceway into the sanctuary. Chatzir tavnit azara. You can't make a courtyard like the azara is. Shulchan tavnit shulchan. Menorah tavnit menorah. Okay, you can't make it in the exact image of the shulchan of the menorah that were in the sanctuary. Aval, those are the shamashai homdim lefanai that you can't make images of. Aval, הוא עושה של 5 ושל 6 ושל 8 ושל 7 לא יעשה. If you want to make a menorah with 5 or 6 or 8, you can, but not with 7. Because the one with 7, right, 7 kanim, that's right, that's the one they had in the temple. Afilu shel shar minei matechot. Even if you don't make it in gold, any other kind of matechet, metal, is a problem. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda omer, af shel eitz lo yaseh, kederach shasu beit cheshmonai. Even wood, you can't do it because the Cheshmonaim made their menorah of wood, and now we're going to see there was a machloket about whether the Cheshmonaim actually made it of wood or made it with something else. So now we're going to see that what the rabbis responded to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Amrula misham ra'aya, what you want to prove from there? Shapudim shel barzel hayu v'chofim bebaz. It was made of iron, but they covered it with not eitz, but baz. Baz is lead. Okay, and what was the problem? They didn't have gold. You're supposed to make it of gold, but they didn't have gold. They couldn't afford it. So what did they do? They made it of lead. Okay, according to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, they made it of wood. So either which way we have this machloket. Is it forbidden to make it of wood or just of a metal? Okay, because it all depends on what the menorah could have been made out of. Anyway, we're going to keep going on with what the rabbis retorted back. They said, well, first they made it of iron with lead covering. Shiur, when they got wealthier, asum shel kesef, they made it of silver. Chazru v'Shiur, when they got even wealthier, then they went back, asum shel zahav, and they made it of gold. So anyway, the point being, this is our response. It's actually not forbidden to make anything in the form of the moon. It's only forbidden to make things that you actually know their exact form, and you can't make a model of it, right? That's, I guess, again, what exactly is forbidden? Is it a model? Is it to size? Is it exactly like? Okay, some people say this is only in the time of the temple. You're not allowed to make it. When there's no temple, maybe you can, right? When you go to Machon Mikdash, they have all these replicas. That could be different because that's a lamed. We want to teach people. So again, there could be all sorts of possible ways you can do this, but for the most part, it's forbidden. So now they say, wait a minute. You're assuming then you could only not make things like the things that are mishamshim and takadosh baruch hu in the temple, but not things in the heavens. But wait, things in the heavens are permitted. Hatanya, it says in a Braita, lo tasuniti, lo tasun kidmut shamashayim shamshim lefanai b'marom. Okay, this one is the same as the previous, but adds the words in the heavens. Well, you can't say that's talking about in the Beit HaMikdash. It says in the heavens, so that's a problem. So rejection of answer number 1. Moving to Amud Bet now, answer number 2. Amar Abai. Lo asra Torah ela bidmut arba'a panim bahade hadade. When the Torah forbade an image, what it forbade was an image of the 4 faces. Okay, there's a Rashi tells us it's Pnei Shor ba'adam ba'aryeh v'nesher l'chaya achat dugmat chayot hakodesh. Okay, this is the things that we're talking about. The munam shamshim lefanai are not the sun and the moon. Okay, and then the moon would be allowed. It's actually things like the chayot that are surrounding God up in the heavens, and that's these arba'a panim b'hadi hadadi, these 4 faces together. So they say, wait a minute, if the only problem of making an image is the things that are up in the abode, the 4 faces here, well then making the face of a human by itself should be permitted. And we learned, Alamatanya, what do we read in that Braita? Kola partsufim mitarim chutz mi partsuf adam. Said partsuf adam is not permitted, and we just said only the 4 faces, the 4 images together is forbidden, but a partsuf adam by itself would be permitted. So Amar Rav, we're going to have a response to this. Amar Rav Yehuda, sorry, Berei de Rav Yoshua. Mi Pirkei de Rav Yoshua Shmieleh, I learned in the Drashot of Rav Yoshua, Lo ta'asun iti, lo ta'asun oti. So iti, on the one hand, means iti, the four partsufim. On the other hand, it also can be read as oti, don't make like me. And what's like me? We saw this in the previous daf, which is in the image of God, which is humans, are in the image of God. So basically, we can't make the four partsufim, and we can't make the image of a human. Okay, but everything else is permitted. So now they want to question that. Really, everything else is permitted? All the other things that serve God up in the heavens are forbidden, are permitted. V'hatanya lo tasuniti, lo tasun kidmut shamashayim shemshim lefanai b'marom. And in this brayta, we're now going to have what we tried to say is the ones up in the heavens are just the four partsufim. And then in addition, we have partsuf adam because that's a separate from oti, iti, oti. But this brayta continues and delineates exactly what's forbidden and says kigon ofanim usrafim b'chayot hakodesh u'malachei hasharet, which includes many more things. So now we can explain it that way, which we assume would then also include the sun and the moon and all that. So we're back to square one. After two possible answers, we still don't know how Rabban Gamliel made the images of the moon and of the moon. Okay, so let's just review for a quick minute. We tried to say answer number one was it's only things that are in the temple that you can make their exact form, but we rejected that. Then we said maybe because it said even things up in the heavens. Then we said maybe up in the heavens is just the four partsufim. And then we had to add also the Adam, but this other Braita seems to say it's way more than that. So Amrabai lo asra Torah ela shamashim shebemador elyon. Okay, now notice the sun and the moon were not listed in the things in the heavens. It said Tofanim, the Srafim, the Chayot, HaKodesh, U'Malachei Hasharet, which are all those beings that serve with God in the upper. There's 7 levels of the Rakia, of the heavens, and these are the ones that are in the upper one with God. Okay, but Shemamador Tachton, the sun and the moon, I think are in the second Rakia, and these are in the 7th. Okay, the other ones are at the 7th, and this is lower down in the 2nd. In the lower ones, they're permitted. Okay, that's what we're going to assume. So now it means, again, we're going to say, oh, this doesn't include the sun and the moon is what's important to us. So now they say, wait a minute, Sheba Madora Tachton Mishare, is it really permitted, the ones in the lower heavens? V'hatanya Asher B'Shamayim, okay, because it says, Lo Tasuni, right, what's the pasuk, sorry, Lo Tasel Chapesa B'chot Muna, Asher B'Shamayim, this is 2 pasukim after the one with the Lo Tasuniti, Chot Muna Asher B'Shamayim Mimal, Asher Ba'aretz Mitachat, this is in the 10 Commandments. So now what? Ve'asher b'mayim mitachal la'aretz. So now they're going to say, what do we learn from asher b'shamayim? So because it says asher b'shamayim mima'al, asher b'shamayim comes l'rabot chama u'levana kochavim u'mazalot. So now we're going to learn that you can't make anything and you can't avoid this. At this point, there's no way to avoid it. We tried to keep giving answers and saying maybe that excludes the moon, but now we can't because this clearly, this Rasha says, you can't make images that are in the form of the sun and the moon and the kochavim and the mazalot and the stars and the constellations. And mima'al, why does it say asher b'shamayim mima'al? B'shamayim is the lower and mima'al is the upper, which is the rabot al sharet. So now we have really no explanation. How can we explain that? Well, we're still going to try. Kitanya ha'ila avdam. When it said don't make an image of the sun, the moon, and all that, that's if you want to worship them, right? Rabban Gamliel clearly wasn't doing to worship. Right? Until now, we've been talking about not making images, even if you're not going to worship them. So now we're going to distinguish. If you're going to worship them, then you can't make any image, right? The sun and the moon, for sure, you can't make. But you also, right, if you're not going to worship them, then there's certain things you can't do, but you can actually do the sun and the moon. And obviously, Rabban Gamliel was not trying to worship it. So now they're going to say, wait a minute, Ilav Dam, why do you need a pasuk to tell me if I'm planning to worship it, don't make it in the image of the moon? Even a little worm is forbidden if I'm going to actually worship it. So they say, Inachinami, you're right. But that is actually learned, Misefa Dikra, Nafka. That's going to be learned out from the end of that pasuk, Titania. In other words, that pasuk talks about the sun and the moon, and it also talks about the little worm. Asher ba'aretz. What does asher ba'aretz come when it says, and also in the land? L'rabot yamim u'naharot harim u'kvaot. Okay, so that's to include the seas and the rivers and the mountains and the hills. Well, and the right umitachat. So now, why does it say ba'aretz mitachat underneath that? L'rabat shel shul katan. That's to say, if I'm planning to worship it, even a little worm. So now it actually fits because we're going to say now that this pasuk is teaching you if you're making it as an idol, don't make it in the shape of the moon. Don't even make it in the shape of a little worm, and everything kind of in between and above. And okay, now the problem is they're going to say, wait a minute, but wait, if you do this, this is the second problem with this answer, and this one we're going to actually reject this answer. Because if you just make it not with the intent to worship it, you're going to say it's permitted, and that's why Rabban Gamliel could do this. Vahatanya, doesn't it say in the Braita, lo tasuniti, lo tasun kidmut shamashayim shemshim lefanai b'maron kigon chamal levanah kochavim u'matzalot. And that is not, that's the other pasuk. That's not referring to if I'm going to worship it. That's even if you're not going to worship it. You can't make it in any of those forms. And we're back to where we were at the end of the second question, which is, right, we already said that I'm sorry, at the end of, right, the first difficulty here, sorry. This is back to what we used for the first difficulty here. And now we're going to say, clearly, that seems to indicate you can't make any kind of image of the moon. So how did Rabban Gamliel do this? So now, fourth answer, and here we don't even introduce Abai. Maybe Abai gave up at this point, and it's the Stam Gemara talking, or maybe it is Abai, they just didn't mention his name. Anyway, the Gemara is going to answer a very strange answer. Shani Rabban Gamliel de Acherim Asula. Definitely it's forbidden for Rabban Gamliel to make those images. But other people did it for him, meaning Gentiles did it. And that's why he was able to use them because he didn't make them, but he could use them. So now you have to wonder, wait a minute. Isn't this like on Shabbat, a Jumalacha? You can't tell a Gentile Jumalacha. You can hint to them, but a Mira La'akum is forbidden. So what? He told them to make images for him and had, outsourced it to a Gentile, and that was okay. It seems a little bit strange. So some people say that they made them anyway, and then he bought them off of him, off of the Gentile, or something like that, and that was maybe a possible solution. Anyway, it raises a bunch of questions. And again, they were kind of stuck because they couldn't really figure this out. And they, in the end, get to this answer. That's exactly what happened or not is a good question, but that's how the Gemara solves the problem. So now they say, but wait a minute, we're going to question this as well. Okay, every answer we brought, we had difficulties with. We're going to have a story. Harav Yehuda, Da'achere Masulo. Rav Yehuda had this ring that we're going to see had an image engraved in it, and other people had made it. Va'amar le Shmuel, Rav Yehuda, and Shmuel, his teacher, said to him, Shinana smei enei dedin. Okay, my smart child, blind the eyes of that image that you have. Okay, meaning get rid of it. You can't have that. So they say, no, that was different because hatan b'chotamo boleit umishum chashada. That's because the image jutted out of the ring, and there was a concern that people could worship it, and that's why he wanted to get rid of it because there was a concern when there's this image that's coming out of something, right? That's a 3D image and not just a flat image. There's a concern that people will come to worship it. It looks like an idol. Ditanya, as we see in the following Braita. Tabat shechotama bolet, if the insignia, the part they use for the stamp is coming out, asur lahanicha, you can't leave it, umutar lachtomba, but you actually can sign with it because when you use it to sign something, the image becomes depressed, okay? And therefore you're creating an image that's actually okay because it's not jutting out. But the ring itself is jutting out and therefore it's a problem. Chotama shakua, if it's the reverse, that the ring itself, the stamp is hollow, right? It's what do you say? It's depressed. Mutar lahanicha, you can keep it because it's not actually, we're not worried anyone's going to worship it, but a sor lachtomba, but you can't make an image out of it because what they would do is they would stick it into wax, and then the wax, if it was depressed and you put it in wax, the wax is going to come out with a 3D image there, and that's going to be a problem. So now they say, so basically, what do you see here? Acherim made this, and they wouldn't allow it. So now they say, wait a minute, are we worried about, oh, right. So then we said that's because don't worry about Rav Yehuda, because that's not what Rabban Gamliel had with these pictures. They weren't jutting out apparently, and that wasn't a problem. The problem with Rav Yehuda was it was jutting out, and there was a concern someone might worship it. Okay, and that resolves that problem. But now we're going to have a question on the answer there because are we really worried about this issue of chashad, that if you have some image, people are going to worship it? Okay, some people think Shafi Yativ was named the shul. Some people think it's called that because it was picked up and moved to Nahardea. Okay, some people think it came from the Galut of Yehoiachim way back when in Bayit Rishon. Okay, what exactly this is a good question. It comes up in a bunch of times in Shas. We've seen it before. Anyway, the Beit Knesset of Shafi Yativ in Nahardea, Du'ukime Be'andarta. They had a statue there of a king or something like that. And Abu Shmuel, the father of Shmuel, and Levi, they went there and prayed there. And there wasn't any concern that people were going to worship that. So why were we concerned with Rabbi Yehuda's signature that someone might worship it, and we're not concerned in the shul? So they say Rabbim Shane. The shul is different because the shul is full of people. And because the shul is full of people, there's no concern that maybe all the people will start worshiping Avodah Zarah. We're concerned with an individual, that maybe someone will come and someone will worship Avodah Zarah, or the person himself will worship Avodah Zarah. But we're not concerned when it's public. So then they say, wait a minute. Rabban Gamliel diachid have. But wait, Rabban Gamliel had these images, and he was an individual. So wait a minute. Maybe we should be worried that somebody might pray to his moon images that he had, just like we're concerned with Rabbi Yehuda. So we're now going to resolve this in a few different ways, and this will be the final. In other words, we're in the final answer, which is other people made it for him. Yet we should still be concerned that maybe people will worship it. We're not going to worry. Why not? Either because because he was the nasi, there were a lot of people there. His space was really like a public space. Or maybe it was in parts, and he would always take it apart, and he never sat there whole except for when the witnesses came, and he put it together, and then he'd immediately take it apart, so there was never a concern someone would worship it. Or maybe he was just for teaching purposes, and in this case, right, and as normally you're allowed to do things to teach, like we learned in the Sanhedrin, that the rabbis learned how to do kishuf, magic, and they would even show it in the court to people so that they could ask, is this what you saw the person do or not? So for that purpose, it's permitted, and therefore for this, it was to determine the new moon. For that reason, we permit it, even though theoretically it should be a concern of chashad. Okay, these three answers are to override the concerns that maybe there's a chashad and we should worry that maybe people will come worship it. We're not worried because for that purpose, we're going to permit Titania lo tilmad lasot, so you can't learn to do, but you can learn in order to do it, to understand it, and to be able to teach about it. And that's about kishuf, but we can apply it here as well. Okay, now we have two more things to do today. That was a long sugya about Rabban Gamliel, how his shapes of the moon were permitted. So 4 different answers. Only the 4th one really lasted, which is other people made it. That was the only way we could get around it. Rabban Shimon, which again was a strange answer, because how could Gentiles make something for him, right, that he could then use? Rabban Shimon Gamliel, we're going to go back to the Mishnah now. He distinguished between if it's on a kli that's mechubad or a kli that's mevuzeh. Okay, if it's on a kli mechubad, then we assume it was worshipped. If it was on a kli mevuzeh, we're going to assume, like a non-important kli, we're going to assume it was just decorative and not meant for idol worship. So ezehem mechubadim ve'ezehem mevuzim. I already told you this before, but we're going to see there's 2 answers in the Gemara. Amarab mechubadim lemala min hamayim. This is not what we saw before. Mevuzim lemata min hamayim. Mechubadim is it could be a cooking vessel. It's just at the top part, like on the rim, where it doesn't get full of food there. Then it's for idol worship. If it's down or lower down where the food gets, so then you wouldn't put an idol where the food gets to. It wouldn't be appropriate. Ushmuel amar elu ve'elu mevuzin. Either which way, those are all mevuzin because they're on utensils we use for cooking. Ela Elohim mechubadim she'ala shirim ve'ala nizamin ve'ala tabaot, on the jewelry. And Tanya Kavatei Shmuel mechubadim she'ala shirim ve'ala nizamin ve'ala tabaot. These are different kinds of jewelry. Mevuzim she'ala yorot ve'ala kumkumsin ve'al mechamei chamin. Okay, all the hot water boilers and the pots. Okay, the ve'shal skinim ve'al mitbachot, and on sheets or towels, on kerchiefs. Those are all considered mevuzim. People don't worship those, but they do worship ones that are on jewels. With that, we'll get to the Mishnah, which we already read. Came up earlier. Rabbi Yossi Omer, shochek v'zoreh leruach o matil hayam. Now we're talking about, again, abed ta'abdun. You have to get rid of idols when you see them. So what do you do if it right? So again, I mentioned when we saw this before that Rashi says here that it's actually, he doesn't say it here, he said it before, that we're talking about metal implements here. If it's metal and you can't throwing in Yamamelech won't help you, won't help get it destroyed. So what do? You grind it up into pieces and sprinkle it, either throw it in the air or throw it in the sea. Amrulo, the rabbi said to him, Apuna says Evel, that's a problem. It's going to be fertilizer if you spread it out in the wind. You can't benefit from any little bit from this cherem, which comes from the idol worship, right, from the idols. So you can't benefit at all, and therefore that's benefit. Now, what the machloka between them is a good question. So Tosfot quotes the Rashbam, who basically says, Amrulo Apuna says Evel, because Savre Zeveze Golem Asur. The Rashbam claims that this is part of a bigger machloket of zevazeh golem. When you fertilize with some of the stuff that floats in the air, you're not just fertilizing with the idols, right, with what you crushed up, but you're fertilizing with other things as well. So if you mix things that are permitted and forbidden, and they both work together to fertilize. The question is that forbidden? And according to the Rashbam, that's the machloket here. Rabbi Yossi says, since it's mixed with other things, it's not a problem. And the rabbis say, zevazeh gorem is asur. In the end, it's isser that's in there. Who cares if there's also heter? It's a combination, and therefore, since isser's in there as well, it's a problem, and you're benefiting. So that's possibly one of the explanations of what their machloket is based on. And we'll come back to this tomorrow when we learn the Gemara on this topic. So what did we do today? We started with the Surat Rakon. We had to figure out this complicated Mishnah of Rav Sheshet, which either zigzagged or maybe the whole thing was talking about finding Kelim. That was the difference between Rav and Abai and their answer. We got off on a tangent about the Drakon. Then we got to a story of canceling Avodah Zarah that had the Tzura of Drakon on it. And then we moved to this Tumut Surot Levanot of Rabban Gamliel and how he was able to do that. We had all different possible answers till we resorted to saying he must have had somebody else make them for him. And then we ended with what's Mekubanim and Mevuzim. We had two different explanations and finished up with this Machlok Rabbi Yossi and the rabbis about how you get rid of idols that are made of matechet, grind them up and spread them out to the wind, or or you have to be careful not to spread to the wind according to the rabbis, because that will fertilize and then you'll be benefiting. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day.